Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here today. And my first question for the sponsor is if you could briefly explain what this bill does and also the reasoning for the percentages within the bill.
Thank you so much. Through you, Madam President. As I stated just a minute ago, there are a few pieces of legislation which we are sponsoring and moving today, which all correspond to the issues that we saw over the last year in nursing homes around the state of New York. This bill in particular relates to a concern that is a sincere concern that exists about how much money facilities actually spend on patient care. It was a concern that made it clear to us that even though for the most part, most of the nursing homes around the state, whether they be for-profit or nonprofit, obey, or I should say, abide by a standard of spending a certain amount of money on actual patient care, we know that there are bad actors who use the opportunity and the non-clarity in the law to be able to make some money on the backs of individuals who they should be taken care of. So other states have done similar things, New Jersey, Massachusetts, but ultimately working along with stakeholders and family members, we came up with the idea that 70% of the total revenue on a yearly basis for a nursing home should be utilized for direct patient care. We came up with that number after, again, conversations with stakeholders, and we believe that not only is it the right thing to do, but it is the right approach. And I will last point out, Madam President, that our dear governor has obviously thought that there are some good ideas here because he took some of these ideas, not this bill though, and actually put it into his budget proposal. So I thank him for recognizing that we have a good idea, but I would say that we need to go farther than what the governor does in the budget, which is why we present this bill here, and hopefully we will be able to vote on. Thank you, Madam President. But through you.
Through you, Madam President. Do you, as a sponsor, think that this
yield?
is...
I will.
I'm sorry, does the sponsor yield? Thank you.
Sponsor yields.
Do you think, as a sponsor, that this is similar to the medical loss ratio implemented on health plans?
Through you, Madam President, it is precisely where we got the idea. The sense here, again, is that there is an obligation for folks who are actual providers of care to provide care. And so what we're saying, Madam President, through you, is that if you are responsible for taking care of the most vulnerable of New Yorkers, that we want to make sure that as much of that dollar goes to the actual care of the individual. So it is from the medical loss ratio that we got the idea, but this relates to patient care ratio, Madam President, through you. And again, it is about making sure that as many dollars as possible go to the actual care of the patient as opposed to the pocket of an individual who wants to take advantage of that individual.
Sponsor continue to yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam President.
The sponsor will yield.
Thank you. I perceive also that it is comparable to a medical loss ratio that's implemented on health plans. And can the sponsor please explain how he envisions nursing homes will have the ability to budget for these ratios when their revenue is dependent on the number of patients in the facility at a given time, which is constantly and routinely changing?
I should mention that just to have some numbers on the table, so the state of New York has just over 600 nursing homes. 400 of them are for-profit. And I should point out, Madam President, that over 50% of nursing homes in New York State currently abide by these percentages. They are within the range of almost 70% or just above 70% of patient care. So I would remind you, sir, that, I'm sorry, through you, Madam President, I would remind everyone in the room that what we're talking about is how much money, how much revenue goes into that particular institution every year. If there are less patients on that institution in that particular year, then the revenue is going to necessarily be less. What we're ultimately talking about is 70% of whatever revenue that particular institution gets in that year needs to be utilized for direct patient care if this bill were signed into law.
Through you, Madam Chair, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, ma'am.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. This morning in the Health Committee, Senator May, the Senate Chair on the Aging Committee, raised a concern with this bill, which I actually share. This bill does not exempt capital expenses from the ratio calculation. Let me repeat that. this bill does not exempt the capital expenses from the ratio calculation. However, throughout the pandemic, we have seen nursing homes that have had to make substantial changes and massive capital improvements in their facilities in order to protect the health and the well-being of their residents. Some of these improvements are now permanent. Would you consider, as a sponsor of this bill, amending this bill today before passing it to exempt capital expenses?
Through you, Madam President. First, it would be important to point out where this particularly came from. The senator is correct that it does not currently include capital expenses in that 70%. The reason for that is that it was pointed out to us that, because remember, ultimately what we're trying to do here is we're trying to identify bad actors and take away from them the ability to take advantage of the most vulnerable. So we've seen some bad actors in other states, and maybe even some in this state, who in this type of situation would actually set up shell companies for real estate companies or cleaning companies that would then actually have the money go through, the money that would ultimately go supposedly to patient care would actually go to companies that are subsidiaries of the same owners of the facilities. To be able to avert that, we want to make sure that we eliminate that possibility. Now, I should tell you, though, that this is not a concern that is inconsequential. I will point out, actually, my colleague, not only Senator May, but I will point out particularly to Senator Gounardes. Senator Gounardes came to us with a very important distinction. He talked about a particular nursing home in his district, which was struck by Sandy, and because of where it is, was flooded after the storm. And they made some changes that then made this facility operational above sea level. Maybe that's not the correct terminology, but so that it does not get flooded in whatever storm happens next. And now they're concerned about the costs that are associated with paying back for those changes which they made, which ultimately made the facility usable. So I would tell you that we're certainly considering that. There's something that we are looking into. We are going to move this bill today. However, that is something that we are looking very closely at because it is a concern that is a real one. And we ultimately do not want to create a situation in which institutions that are doing everything that they need to do to take care of their patients, for example, making sure that they do not drown if there is a storm that is coming. That is a very reasonable expectation, Madam President. And so we are certainly taking it into consideration. It is something that I'm aware of. I thank Senator Gounardes and other ones of my colleagues for bringing it up, and something that we will consider as we move towards potentially getting a bill that would be negotiated with the Assembly and the Governor to be signed into law.
Thank you, Madam President. Will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam
The
President.
sponsor yields.
First of all, thank you for your consideration on that. I appreciate this. This is a concern across all of New York State with our nursing facilities. Throughout the year, we have seen upstate facilities that have been facing major staffing shortages when it comes to nursing homes. This has been exacerbated incredibly during the pandemic. How does this proposal account for the differing circumstances between urban and rural nursing facilities?
Well, through you, Madam President, the concern about staffing is an absolute real one in all parts of the state, but particularly in rural parts of the state. Not only in your district, Senator, but also I would point out Senator May, who has been consistent in this issue, not only through this discussion, but going back for as long as she has been here, talking about the need to make sure that we put resources to identify staffing, to be able to train new staffers for places that are difficult to get to, that do not have the sufficient staff at this moment. So I would say that that is a concern that is ongoing. This bill would consider that the facility, because ultimately it has to do with what the facility spends. I cannot force, if a facility doesn't have access to individuals because they cannot find people to employ, right? If they have to, let's say, if they need 10 individuals to fulfill, I'm completely making this number up, but let's say that the facility needs 10 individuals that are caretakers that need to be trained, caretakers, and they can only find 8, we will not penalize them for only finding 8 of the 10 that they should. Ultimately, this refers to how much revenue they're making for that particular year. So if there's a revenue, I kind of, to be able to understand this better for me, I actually just did a quick I said, if there's a nursing home, let's say a nursing home spends $1 million a year, has revenue of $1 million, right? If this bill passes, they would be required to have $700,000 of that $1 million be spent toward direct patient care, which could be PPE, food, housekeeping, medical cares, et cetera. Then of that total million, 400,000, which would correspond to 40% of the total, would need to be used for staffing. Now, the fact is that they might not even spend that much if they can't find the staff. In that sort of situation, there is flexibility for the commissioner to make certain dispensations, if you will. I'll read from the bill. It is, I pointed out, where is it? I'm reading from the bill. The commissioner may adjust the components of the direct patient care ratio as appropriate, based on current financial information reported by nursing homes and overall performance by the nursing home related to patient safety, direct patient care staff ratios, and quality of care. Thank you. So it allows for flexibility so that the commissioner may make the determination that this particular entity it might not have met exactly the ratio, but is obviously doing everything that they need to be able to fulfill the requirements. So it is not a very strict, there is something that is built into the bill, so it allows for flexibility for the commissioner to make a determination in the case of a particular facility.
To yield.
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam
The
President.
sponsor yields.
In the Health Committee meeting this morning, you said that this legislation is a result of conversations with stakeholders. What industry stakeholders or healthcare experts did you consult with in the preparation of this legislation?
We certainly talked to some proprietors of nursing homes. We did talk to 1199 as well. They provided some input. We talked to some of the experts that we have in-house. We talked to patient advocates. The list is, I can't tell you the exact, the list of every single person that we spoke to, but I do think that it corresponds to a good cross-section of all the folks who are interested here, whether we're talking about patient advocates or folks who represent the workers or folks who represent the owners of facilities. So I do believe that that as part of this conversation, we've actually included as many opinions as necessary to be able to make an informed bill that best fits New York and actually addresses the concerns that we're trying to address here, which is ultimately, again, to make certain that facilities use their funding to take care of people and not to go into the pockets of someone.
Through you, Madam Chair, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam President.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. This bill was amended on Wednesday, February 17th. What does the amendment do that was drawn up on February 17th?
Three different things that the amendment actually did. One of them, it actually made the 40%, the 40% that I referred to earlier, which is strictly about staffing. It included that. It also clarified that since there are many instances in which a facility might actually not hire people in-house, but might hire a staffing agency, that it would be done at 85%, which means that as opposed to saying if you hire somebody, it's actually obviously going to cost you more on a day-to-day basis as a full-time staffer, as opposed to, say, hiring a staffing agency to fulfill the requirements of the 10 people that I referred to earlier. So we talked about had that being 85% of the purchased amount would accrue towards that 40% that we're talking about. And last but not least, we talked about the excluding real estate and capital expenses, and that was based on the information that we got from other states in which shell companies are created by entities to actually be able to kind of sidestep the main purpose of the bill.
Will the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam President.
Sponsor yields.
The governor released his 30-day amendments very late on Thursday, the 18th of February. Is the sponsor familiar with the nursing home reforms in the governor's proposed amendments?
Through you, Madam President, I believe that the governor is actually familiar with our proposals. The governor has a tendency, Madam President, to take ideas that we have, call them solutions to problems, and then just give us a watered-down version of something that we legislatively are looking to do. So I am familiar with them, Senator, because they were actually our ideas to begin with. What he has in his proposal are just watered-down versions of some of the pieces of legislation that we're passing today. So I am aware of them, but I should say that he is aware of ours. Through you, Madam President.
Through you, Madam President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Does the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam President.
The sponsor yields.
Thank you. Is the sponsor aware that within 24 hours, the governor proposed identical ratios on nursing home revenues as proposed in your legislation?
President, I don't know the exact timeline, but that sounds about right.
Madam Chair, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam President.
The sponsor yields.
Did the sponsor or anyone on staff consult with anyone in the governor's office or the Department of Health on this proposal prior to the release of the 30-day amendments?
I believe that we did. No. Again, these were ideas that we have been working on in some instances for months, and some draft of bills had been. I think we might have introduced. I have to look at the exact timeline to be completely honest, but what I can't tell you is that this is ideas that we have been working on for many months, but we did not talk to them. We did not talk to the governor. We have just, through you, Madam President. I think the folks can probably tell you I'm not necessarily the type to go around and be palling around with our good friend, the governor. Not on this issue or most other ones. So I did not consult with the governor. He certainly read our bills, though, I can tell you that. Through you, Madam President.
Through you, Madam President, will the sponsor continue to yield?
Will the sponsor yield?
Yes, Madam President.
The sponsor yields.
First of all, to your last comment, that makes two of us. Did anyone in the governor's office consult the sponsor or anyone on staff requesting or suggesting the amendments of this bill to be released in the 30-day amendments?
Through you, Madam President, it is actually a known fact that sometimes makes me quite sad. The governor's never called me in the 11 years that I've been in the state legislature. Not sure why you're laughing at this very sad thing, Senator Janaris, but okay. So let's just say that I have not called him. He has not called me, certainly. And none of my staff has been in contact with his staff about this particular bill. We talk to the administration on all sorts of issues all the time. But on this particular issue, there has been, as far as I know, certainly, well, as far as me, no communications whatsoever, again, which makes me sad. And as far as my staff, I can assure you none of them spoke to the governor about this bill, about these bills that we're talking about today at all.